Hey guys, it's me Pavitra, and in today's video we're going to see how aerospace companies like NASA, ULA and SpaceX choose the fuel that will power their rocket to space. Now, this video is going to get a bit mathy, so make sure you have your calculators out and let's get started. When it comes to choosing a fuel for your rocket, all it boils down to is two things: the total cost associated with the fuel and how reliable and precise the fuel is. Costs include the cost of the fuel itself, the cost of handling the fuel, and the cost of insulation or other structures and systems needed to support the fuel. Reliable and precise means how consistent the performance of the fuel is. So let's go ahead and look a bit more deeply into these two statements. For the purpose of this video, let's make a standard rocket in which we will place different fuels and see how they perform. Let's make this standard rocket of ours a two-stage rocket.
The standard first stage is 28 meters in length, 4 meters in diameter, and has a total volume of around 350 meter cubed. The standard second stage is also 4 meters in diameter, has a length of 11 meters, and can hold around 150 meter cubed of propellant.
Let the dry mass of the first stage and second stage be 30 tons and 5 tons respectively. Let's let the fairing be 10 meters in length and 2 tons in weight. Now let's choose the fuels that we will be testing. We'll take hydrogen, methane and RP1 because they are some of the most common liquid rocket fuels that are used. We'll also take a fuel called P-band APCP, which stands for, you don't really want to know what it stands for, but just in case you're a nerd, there it is on the screen. I chose this because it is one of the most commonly used propellant on solid rocket boosters. Along with that, we'll test aluminium with liquid oxygen as a propellant for a solid rocket booster. That should be really interesting. And finally, just for fun, let's add in metallic hydrogen. So those are our fuels: H2, CH4, RP1, P-band APCP, aluminium and metallic hydrogen. 6 fuels, 6 rockets. So let's fill up our rockets with these fuels. But before we do that, we need to keep in mind that fuels require oxidizers. So we'll make some space for them as well. No pun intended. Now before we start mathing really hard, I want to tell you that yes, I know you can't just take a rocket and fill up any fuel in it, but to make things simpler and this video shorter, we'll assume it doesn't make a lot of difference. Now that we have the rocket filled up, let's calculate how much payload it can put into low Earth orbit, otherwise known as LEO. Now this is where we take out our calculators. If you don't like math, which I don't blame you for, you don't need to close your eyes and ears. I promise I'll make it quick. The way you calculate the payload capacity is using this equation. This is the equation to calculate delta V of a two-stage rocket. It's basically the rocket equation but extended to include 2 stages. The P is the payload capacity, dV is the delta V needed to get to low Earth orbit, EXS is the exhaust velocity of the rocket engine at sea level, and the EXV is the exhaust velocity of the rocket engine in vacuum. The thing inside these brackets should be the initial mass divided by the final mass. We'll now see how much payload each fuel can take to low Earth orbit in the standard rocket. Again, for simplicity, we'll assume that the rocket is expendable. If you want me to do the math for a reusable rocket as well, then let me know in the comments and like any comment that asks for it. Now let's move on and see how much these beauties can chuck to space. The hydrogen rocket can take approximately 10.5 tons of payload to low Earth orbit. The methane rocket, 16.5. The RP1 rocket, 16 tons. The P-band APCP rocket, 18 tons. The aluminum hybrid, 20 tons. And get ready for it, the metallic hydrogen rocket, 6,000 tons. Now let's put them all up together in a table like that so that we can clearly see the difference. Obviously, the metallic hydrogen was added just for fun. Humans can't yet make metallic hydrogen, let alone put it in a rocket. So let's knock that off the list. You might also be wondering, I started this by saying we would compare the cost and ended up comparing payload capacity. What's going on? Remember I said we'll assume that the rockets are expendable? Good. That means that the majority of the cost, like 99.7% of the cost of an expendable rocket, is the rocket itself. So all of those 6 launches we did cost is basically the same. The ones that took more payload to orbit were cheaper per unit payload, that is to say, had a lower cost per kilo, and the ones that took less to space had a higher cost per kilo. This means that the most costly fuel is the hydrogen liquid oxygen combo, often called hydrolox, followed by the RP1 liquid oxygen combo, often called kerolox. Those are followed by the methalox, followed by the solid rocket, and at the top was the aluminum liquid oxygen combination. Let's call this alulox.
Before we move on with this video, I thought we should try and understand why we got the results that we got. Why did alulox have the most payload and why was hydrogen not that good? To understand this, we need to go back a few minutes to the rocket equation. Rocket science all boils down to one thing. How much delta V can your rocket hold? And the rocket equation says that delta V is the product of the exhaust velocity and the natural log of the mass ratio. Simply put, the greater the speed of the gases coming out of the flamey end, the better. And the more mass of propellant you can fit in the rocket, the better. Because if you can fit more, then the initial mass will be higher for the same final mass, which means the overall value of this term will be higher. Fuels with a high specific energy, which is the energy stored per unit mass, have a high exhaust velocity. This is because there is more energy to accelerate the same mass of fuel. On the other hand, you can put more fuel in the rocket if your fuel and oxidizer have a high bulk density, because the mass of the same volume of propellant will be more. Hydrogen has the highest specific energy of all the fuels, but has a terrible density, which is why it ranks lowest in the delta V spectrum. Methane and RP1 are what you would call average fuels. Methane has a low-ish density but a good specific energy, and RP1 is the opposite. PBAN, APCP and aluminium have a high delta V because they are really high density fuels, and this gives them a high rank even though they have bad specific energy values. Now let's have a look at why aluminium gave a slightly better performance than PBAN APCP. We have all learned in high school that burning something requires oxygen. For the PBAN APCP, oxygen is provided by the APCP. Here's the formula. It has quite a lot of oxygen, but it also needs to carry the extra chlorine, nitrogen and hydrogen. These three elements in no way add to the energy of the fuel and just act as useless mass we have to carry around. This problem is eliminated when pure oxygen is used as the oxidizer, which is the case with the alulox hybrid. So now that we fully understand the results of our calculation, let's move forward with the video.
As I said at the start of the video, there are two factors that mattered when choosing the fuel. One was the cost and the other was precision. From what research I have done, throttling hybrids can be a fiasco, since you cannot control the amount of fuel you supply and can throttle only by changing the amount of oxygen you let into the combustion chamber. This means that the stoichiometric ratio will change as you throttle, and this creates a very chaotic environment, so the thrust isn't really predictable, which is the last thing you want when you need to deliver a payload into a precise orbit. The same stands for solid rockets. They cannot be throttled at all. Once you have turned them off, they cannot be stopped or slowed down until the fuel is over. The liquid fuels, however, are much more easy to throttle, and this is the reason why they are used more often. Solids are used, but only on first stages, because first stages don't need to be very precise. It's the job of the second stage to deliver the payload into an orbit. So using solids or hybrids on the first stage can help get more payload to space. Then you might ask, why aren't hybrids used on the first stages? I asked Tori Bruno, the president and CEO of United Launch Alliance, and he said that hybrids almost always lose due to their complexity. Solids are used, and most of the time it's just not worth it to develop a very complicated hybrid just for that little bit of extra payload. I mean, hybrids give only a 10% improvement over solids, and when we're speaking of only first stages, which themselves only contribute to about 30% of the rocket's delta V, there would be only a 3% advantage of using hybrids over solids. As I said, most of the time it's just not worth it. But who knows? This is rocket science we're talking about. Some days someone might think it's worth it and go ahead and make an alulox hybrid rocket engine. Personally, I'm all for it. I would love to see a hybrid rocket fly. After all these 3% improvements can add up to have a pretty significant impact in performance. And now let's address the elephant in the room, or in the payload bay. We know why companies don't use hybrids or solids that much. But how do they decide which of the three liquid fuels to choose? Obviously, since methane and RP1 give the most payload, that's what they should choose, right? Then why do some people choose hydrogen? Well, it's mainly the fact that hydrogen is the most precise fuel out of the three. The accuracy of a hydrogen second stage is absolutely unparalleled. And since the second stage carries 70% of the delta V, the more energy dense the fuel, the better. And the most energy dense fuel we know of is hydrogen. A hydrogen second stage can give the highest amount of delta V. Methane and RP1 don't really have a significant difference in cost when you look at it, but the reason someone might choose either one over the other is whether or not the rocket is reusable. RP1, it turns out, is terrible for reusable rockets because of the soot it produces and gives hell to the turbo pumps. So methane is preferred for rockets that are partially or wholly reused. So what we can take from this video is that out of the 6 fuels we chose at the start of the video, metallic hydrogen we cannot make yet. Solids and hybrid do decrease cost per kilo but lose it when it comes to precision, so they're always limited to first stages. And hybrids aren't even used because getting a 3% improvement over solids is not worth the complexity that they introduce into the rocket. We also learned that out of the 3 liquid fuels, hydrogen is good when used for precision and high energy upper stages, and that RP1 and methane are both a good choice for the first stage with solid rocket boosters strapped on. Methane is better when planning reusability. In a nutshell, fuel first stages by solids in either RP1 or methane and use hydrogen for the upper stage. That would give you the best results.
Now, real quick before we wrap up the video, I wanted to make a big announcement. From this video onwards, I'm introducing a new segment in all of my videos. This segment belongs to you. That's right. In this segment, I'll be featuring one of your space ideas or concepts that you can send me either on my Twitter, in the comments of my videos, or via email. Today's space concept is sent to me on Twitter by a gentleman by the name of Roger Garrett. He proposed that we could modify a lunar starship so that the cabin section can separate from the rest of the starship. This way, we could use Starship's main engines to slow the entire craft out of moon orbit and prepare for landing. We could then separate the cabin section and land it using the already built landing thrusters. This provides a fully functional base station from which the astronauts have ground level access to the lunar surface. I think it's a decent idea. Ground level access makes EVAs much simpler and you get a full 1000 meter cubed of pressurized volume ready to be used.
So that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it. Also, I'm not going to ask you to like and subscribe and share all that good stuff because at this point, you're obligated to do so considering the amount of hours I'm putting into this YouTube channel. So scroll down and do the required. See you later.